I mean, good news, we have the Shenzhen link reportedly could be 2 Mondays, November 21st or November 28th. But we sort of have to wait a little bit more for that to really kick in, I think, if the Shanghai experience is any indication.
Yeah, we think it will be done by the end of this year, and that's really quite a constructive development. I think it was delayed towards the end of last year, but now, yes, that's going to sort of complete the link-up.
Okay, is the link-up interest at least going to be tied into the yuan, especially weakening once again? We thought that after the break we'd see some strengthening, but that's not the case.
Yeah, I think some clients thought that 670 was sort of a line that would hold. I think it's interesting that it's weakening again. We think it'll be 682 by the end of this year and something like 725 end of next year. That's partly because the dollar globally we think is going to be strong. It also shows that China isn't out of the woods yet in relation to growth. It still needs that stimulus from a somewhat weak currency.
But does that affect the interest from global investors and also domestic ones with that Shenzhen link?
Well, at the margin, it does, in the sense that most of the stocks in China derive their revenues at home. So, for example, the MSCI China is 95% revenue denominated in renminbi, so you get a negative translation effect. It's not like topics where you've got a lot of dollar earners. But actually, if you're buying growth stocks in Shenzhen, that's somewhat of a second-order consideration. And there are plenty of stocks that you can look at in the new economy area in Shenzhen that global clients will be interested in.
The 725 by the end of next year, what will that do to investor sentiment?
Well, I think it's a kind of a continuation of what we've already seen for a year or so now, which is a gradual depreciation versus the basket of 6 to 8%. It's not unusual in an EM context, and dollar strength is somewhat universal at the moment. So I think it's something that investors can cope with. But it takes the gloss off a little bit when you're thinking about targets for HSCEI, which of course is a Hong Kong dollar denominated index.
Interesting that there was a call from Deutsche Bank that was saying if China's going to rein in the housing market, they're going to cool things down, they're going to continue to see easier monetary policy, and then the Fed's going to tighten, that it could actually spur more capital outflows and actually weaken the currency by 17%. On the other side, you got the top Yuan forecaster saying, you know what, the weakness is going to be limited from here. Why do you think we see such extremities when it comes to these calls on dollar renminbi?
Well, I guess you often do in relation to everything about China. But in terms of our forecast, yes, it's slightly more on the conservative side than the one that you just mentioned from the competitor. And we do think China's growth is genuinely recovering here. But it was an important philosophical change that they made August of last year when they did begin to actually allow the currency to steadily weaken. That suggests it's a medium-term change in policy.
But how are they going to continue to recover, especially if they're going to refrain from infrastructure, credit lending, and also putting the brakes on the property markets?
Well, the really big question, you're covering it in your news stories today, is around SOE reform. You're covering a big potential merger in the chemical sector. Your analysts are mentioning that that's happened previously in sectors like nuclear, in terms of shipping and railways.
Right.
If you can kind of reallocate labour from underperforming SOEs, and if M&A is part of the solution to that, to new economy sectors, then you can slow or even reverse the decline in productivity growth that China's.
As an investment theme, though, I mean, we've seen that in railway. We're perhaps going to see that in chemicals. What do you think the next industry is going to be?
Well, I can't make specific
we sort of have
this.
we're checking them out.
But I tell you,
what's left.
If we look longer-term picture at China in terms of industries that are actually capable of revenue growth above nominal GDP, we've been talking a lot about healthcare. You look at the historical experience of Korea and Japan, that's what happened in an aging society and a wealthier society. We've been talking about mass market consumer, defense spending, and then clean energy, kind of new technology, high tech. These are all themes that you can play in Shanghai and Shenzhen. It's less easy to play them offshore here in Hong Kong, but they are the future of the economy in China.